So we have our own experience that shows us that we have believed that our happiness is to be found in outcomes. We have been seeking outcomes, and most of us have got at least some of the outcomes that we've been seeking. And then what happens is we get them and we think, oh, that's nice, but it's not quite what I thought. In the next day, we find ourselves setting a new objective, a new goal, still feeling uncomfortable. Maybe it takes a week after we get what we were really craving. And then a week later, we find that the effect of having got what we want wears off because it doesn't deliver continuous, unbroken happiness. And we are now craving for the next thing. Oh, please God, I was wrong about that, but this next thing, give me that. The same attitude to the outcome we haven't learned from the previous time. Once again, the Chinese proverb, be careful what you wish for, you might just get it. Some things you pray for, you get, you realize that they're not what you thought they were, and then you can't get rid of them. So, be clear on what you're really looking for. In this teaching, it says, we're looking for continuous unbroken peace of mind. And we've just spent an hour and a bit talking about what exactly that is and where it comes from, what the error in the system is. So, our attachment to outcome, we all have our experience in the past that should at some point be enough for us to say, maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe there is a deeply ingrained belief that is completely mistaken, and like most of society, we haven't realized, even though it's right there in front of us, appearing time after time after time, we haven't realized that our happiness is not to be found in the flow of life. We haven't realized that our happiness is not to be found in outcomes. We haven't realized that even love from the other is not going to give us this peace of mind. And so that's one proof for ourselves, if we really look at it and see the implication of it, that tells us my happiness isn't to be found in outcomes. The other proof along that same line, which is really powerful, is when we start finding a connection to the core of who we are, and in the face of pain, in the face of even pleasure, we rest in our being and we realize, I don't mind if the pleasure stops, I still am. And in the face of pain, we have lost our job and the thinking mind kicks in, and then we realize this disturbance is an uncomfortableness with oneself, and an uncomfortableness with oneself is a forgetting who I am and a believing myself to be something I'm not, which is enforced and included in the narrative of the worry or the anxiety from having lost your job. And in that moment, we might remember and drop back into our being, and we realize, we connect. And it's like, here I am. Yeah, I'll deal with that. I will start applying for jobs. First thing I need to do is fix my resume up. But in that moment, you've dropped into your own being, and you remember. Not remember in your head. I remember. You get direct feedback from your sense of self that says, it's okay. I am, even with the news that I've lost my job. And then you say, yeah, I'll rest here for a bit. And then with the working mind, I will do what is needed to try and improve my circumstance, knowing that the outcome is not in my control, but knowing that this core is always here. So the more that we drop into being in the face of pain, and we find our suffering gets cut off, and we find that our happiness in the form of peace of mind is there even in the face of pain, then we get first-hand proof my completeness is not dependent on pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. Because I can feel complete and at peace even in the face of a loved one dying, in the face of having lost my job, in the face of someone having cheated me, in the face of someone keeping me up at night, till 3 a.m. because they're playing loud music. We get our own confirmation that that aspect of the human being is always available at our core. Now, when that movement into being hasn't established itself, we don't have any other experience other than, well, the best I can do in life is get pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. This is why the spiritual teachings point us inwards and say, no, what you are at your core is not dependent on outcomes. Rest there, become familiar with it. And as we do that, we start to appreciate, wow, this ingrained belief was pointing me in completely the wrong direction. And then we see, wow, but all of society, all of humanity is pointing in that direction that I was pointed in. And that's when we realize, we've lost a connection to ourselves. And so, therefore, we're forced to seek completion outward. And society doesn't tell us, no, don't seek outward, don't want more, because where you'll find peace is inward. Society doesn't tell us that. 1, because society doesn't know. 2, because it's not in society's interest, especially economics. They don't tell you, just relax into your own being and then see what happens. They say, no, you need more. You need to buy more of what I have to sell. And if you do buy more of what I have to sell, you'll get closer to happiness. And spirituality is there in the background, saying, when I say spiritual, I mean spiritual teachings. In the end, we realize life is spirituality, that spirituality is not a segment of life, but rather spirituality is an attitude to all of life. It's an attitude to finance, it's an attitude to relationship, it's an attitude to pleasure, it's an attitude to holidays, it's an attitude to family. That's spirituality. But spiritual teachings are there telling us it's not out there. It's not out there. But we're not designed to resonate with that until we are. And when we do start resonating, and we read more and more, and we hear more and more, we say, why didn't my parents tell me this? Then we realize, because they didn't know. So that explanation, we are not the doers, because everything is happening according to God's will, because everything is a spontaneous arising in the moment, or because everything that happens through me is a result of my genes and up-to-date conditioning, 2 factors I had absolutely no control of. That's why the belief in personal doership that says I should have acted differently, I'm in control of who I am, and I could act anyway in a particular moment, I could fly if I want. It would be an extreme belief of the notion of personal doership. Basically, it's a ridiculous belief that we can be a whole range of things, when in fact the reality is we are one way in each moment. So as we see this more and more, when the suffering from that belief in personal doership arises, we'll say, okay, it's arising because the belief is there. But now another part of the system says, I don't believe it. And it may be that that part of the system in that moment is not strong enough to do anything about it. It's not destined for it to stop. But at least that part of the system is saying, it's there. It's telling me that I should have and I could have done it differently. It's blaming myself because the outcome is pain, and I believe in that part of me that pain is an attack on who I am. But actually I don't believe that story. So as that part of us strengthens, the other part, the old part of the doership, starts to run out of juice. Same, attachment to outcomes. My happiness is to be found in outcomes. We might feel anxious about an outcome. We might feel expectation about something and catch that this narrative about how I want things to work out in the next 6 months, and if they work out that way, how great it will be because I can do this and that. We see that and we say, okay, it's happening. I've seen it and it hasn't stopped happening, but I don't believe that. And as this I don't believe it sets in, and not I don't believe it just because I've been told it's not true, but because I've really investigated and seen it's not true. You know, as we investigate more, this part of us that knows it's not true gets stronger. There's less involvement in that other part, and so it loses its juice.
That means people who are always in worry. There are some people who are worrying about environment. Oh my God, what will happen? And also facing death, for example. And they are always attached to negative outcome. They think always there will be some negative outcome. Or why is it? How could you explain? Maybe you did this fourth one. Always worrying and be in envy. Is it envy?
Anxiety. Well, essentially, intuitively, and not only intuitively, we've seen that life can deliver anything. You know, in any moment we can have a pain, then go to the doctor and get a result back that says things are not good. And so to the extent that someone has registered that this is how life can be, the attachment to outcome in that particular person can, if it's of a certain type that then finds itself worrying about the future all the time, turns into this uncomfortableness, like, what will happen if I get a critical illness? What will happen if the environment, suddenly all the bees die and then we don't have any food? And the anxiety and the worry is intense uncomfortableness. And the fact is, it's true, the bees might stop pollinating flowers if they die. And then we will have a problem. But let's deal with that, or I'll have to deal with it. I'll have to live in that situation if it happens. The fact is, it may not happen because there are people that are using the working mind to see that this is a problem, to inform people, to put legislation in place. And so it may not happen. And often what our anxiety says is, this is going to happen. I'm sure I have cancer. If we feel a pain, the anxiety will say, this is it, somehow I know I have cancer. And then they go and get tested, and the result comes back and it's nothing. Now, it's not that it always will be nothing, but what we have to realize is that that feeling of anxiety is convinced that the worst is going to happen and there's no option. And when we start seeing that my anxiety is a feeling that floods the system, it tells me that the worst has already happened and I'm just waiting to find out about it. And in reality, when the anxiety fades away, we look at life differently and we say, actually, what makes me think this is cancer? It could just be heartburn or because of something I ate. And then we say, that's strange, because last night I was convinced that I had 6 months to live. That's what the anxiety is saying. It's a complete attachment to outcome and ultimately an attachment to being the body and not being connected to the core that is content because it is now. That's the core of the human that is so potent. That's where we find our center, where we rest in that isness, and we find that that isness is just happy being now. It has no thought about whether it will be tomorrow, whether it was last year. And it knows, maybe I won't be tomorrow, but I'll deal with that tomorrow. So anxiety, it's not that you shouldn't feel anxiety, because if someone feels anxiety, they can't help it. They would love not to feel anxiety. It's a very uncomfortableness with oneself. And it's a result of these factors, and particularly the attitude of attachment to outcome. Meaning, if outcome is negative, who will I be? And the ultimate assault on this identity that believes it is just the body is death. That is the ultimate assault on that psychological identity, which is why spiritual teachings has said when this psychological identity dissolves, the fear of death dissolves with it. Which doesn't mean if someone approaches me with a gun or a knife that I won't be biologically afraid. But that's a biological fear in a circumstance. When I'm sitting at home watching television or lying in bed at night, what won't arise is a psychological fear of death. Actually, if I think about what is after death, now this might not be right, but based on an understanding of what life is, an experience, death is, in my account, the end of experience. And definitely the end of Roger. So Roger just says, well, actually that would be great, very peaceful. There won't even be Roger to feel it being peaceful. So for Roger, it is the complete end. And Roger says, how can I be worried about that? I'm not even there I won't be there to have a problem. So the worry is actually not a worry about death. It's a worry about the idea of death in life. That is what the fear of death is. The fear of the psychological identity in this moment about an imagination of not being. If we don't exist after death, then there won't be a problem, even for that psychological entity that is having a problem in life with the idea of death. Death will be peace from that suffering, peace from that fear, peace from that anxiety. But the fact is that life is an unfolding of this human experience, and anxiety is one of the forms of suffering, which will fall away because the fear of death, the psychological fear of death, falls away.
I'm not sure, but I was thinking the result of losing the sense of doership and attachment to outcomes would be a state similar to the one you have when you drop into being. So it's some similarity, maybe. Because
when that attachment to outcome and belief in personal doership isn't there, our access to being is very much available. We can rest there most of the time. What I've found is that when the suffering doesn't arise, then there's less of a reason to rest in being. When the suffering is there, dropping into being is basically the breaking of the habit of suffering. We remember, I am, and drop into beingness. And so from dropping out of suffering into beingness feels like the base, feels like home, feels like who I am. At least it feels like that is peace, because it's dropping out of suffering. What if that beingness isn't always available, continuous, unbroken beingness? then we might think, oh, that's a shame, because that means I don't have continuous unbroken peace of mind. But what if continuous unbroken peace of mind is available, but it doesn't need there to be continuous unbroken beingness? Now, because continuous unbroken, or because beingness is so nice, so sweet, we say, well, okay, this is what I want. And it's easy because we know beingness as the opposite of suffering, because we drop into being. What if that's another expectation or another attachment to something that is not available on a continuous unbroken basis? And then the mind says, oh, well, if that's not available on a continuous unbroken basis, then my peace of mind isn't available on a continuous unbroken basis. And I'm saying, what if peace of mind is available on a continuous unbroken basis, but it's even more simple and more plain than the feeling of being? And so, what do you mean? So what about if you are walking down the street? You're not resting in the feeling of being. You're just walking down the street feeling like you are the person. And you spend the day, and there's no suffering arising. No need to drop into being, because the suffering doesn't arise. If we set up the expectation that enlightenment, peace of mind is beingness, then we might say, oh, something is missing in this day. Whereas actually, except for the expectation that beingness is there all the time, nothing's missing. As soon as the expectation for beingness falls away, then there is full peace of mind with just feeling like the person, let's say not even any connection to being. And there's no problem. That is peace of mind in its very simple form. Then let's say at the end of the day, you sit down with a cup of tea and you realize, I haven't been feeling some being today, but I've been at peace. No problem. And then you say, and then you drop into being. Here it is. So it's like a pleasure. But it's a pleasure that is not dependent on circumstance, really. In a way, it might be dependent on circumstance, because what you're doing, your activity, may not be compatible with dropping into being. But it's available anytime you stop. And it's available simultaneous to a lot of your movements, talking and walking. It is available then as well, but it may not be destined for it to be there when walking. And if it's not there when walking, as long as you don't have an expectation for it, and there is no other form of suffering, no guilt, no blame, no pride, no worry and anxiety, and no other expectation, including the expectation of beingness, then you find, I have peace of mind. And so then if someone says, but peace of mind is one thing, but you can have so much more. You could be resting in being. And then you say, actually, I'm just happy with peace of mind. And it turns out that being is the core of who I am, and I can rest there as often as I want. But if I find myself through a particular day not resting there for whatever reason, I don't want to, or it doesn't happen, or whatever, and there is peace of mind, I say, so what? If there was suffering and I wasn't resting in being, then it wouldn't exactly be so what, because the experience during the day would be of uncomfortableness. And that in itself, if I don't get involved in it, then there's a peace with the suffering. The suffering is suffering. You can't avoid the fact that if there is a feeling of suffering, it is suffering. The best is if we find ourselves at peace with that suffering, and even better still is if the suffering doesn't arise. So as long as there is the absence of suffering, which is peace of mind, I say that peace of mind is even more simple than being.
Yeah, I guess this is a misunderstanding many people, many seekers have, because we have the thought that all the great sages were always constantly in their being, like Ramana Maharshi or someone. You may think they were always functioning from that point, not just peace of mind, but always from their being. So that's, I guess, it's why we think that that's the thing to have.
To have, and it makes sense because you see the pictures and you know your own feeling from being, and there's no denying it's a gift in itself. But if we set that up as what we're really looking for, we might have set up something more complex than what is really available. So the thing is, was there a time in the day, maybe an hour or 10 minutes, where Ramana isn't resting in being? Now, obviously, all the photos that you put up are times when he's resting in, really in like meditation. But when he's in the... And I know this is because I know you can function from being while talking to someone, while chopping the carrots and whatever. You can. It's not that you can't do that. The question is that peace of mind? Right? Or is peace of mind something more simple? And so this teaching says what we're really looking for is peace of mind. When there is peace of mind, even the simple one, then there is no wanting things to be different. But it's so easy for the mind to go, yeah, okay, but what about I have peace of mind and being at the same time? I say, yeah, that's great, that's a bonus. But what if for 10 minutes or for an hour there is just peace of mind and no being? Then someone will say, well, that's not as good. Something's missing. And I say, well, your experience, if you did just have peace of mind, no being, is that nothing is missing, because that's what peace of mind is. Peace of mind is the absence of the feeling anything is missing.
I have another question. It's about death.
Okay.
You just talked about it. I agree with you. I also have this view that death is the end of Joseph and experience. But I'm not happy with it. I have the feeling that I'm not happy with it because it seems so nothingness.
But nothingness for who?
Yeah, it's true. But
so
it seems like boring to me, like.
But boring for who?
Yeah, I can understand what you say intellectually, but
no. But so the important thing is to see that the uncomfortableness, the fact that it seems boring, like it's important to see that is a modulation of mind in daily living, right? It is an interpretation of something that actually will be completely different because it will be the absence of that modulation of mind.
Yes.
So to recognize, I think I'm assessing it correctly, but this thinking that is assessing the absence of Joseph can't, because it is the presence of Joseph, at least even the presence of the thinking mind. So it can't get it right. And so if there is an uncomfortableness, it's because you can see the uncomfortableness is, that will be boring, that will be nothing. And then we say, for who? And you realize that, well, for no one. And then where's the problem? So that then says, be clear that it is a problem, like anxiety, created in the present moment, and it isn't really a problem about the past, so a problem about the future. It is a problem in the present moment, using an imagination of the future as the food, let's say.
Yeah, I was thinking also that it may be an attachment to having experience, which is
very
life.
much, yes.
And maybe this is, kind of like to live and to have experiences, and then since I have the image, it's the end of having experiences. I want to continue to have, and I'm having fun somehow.
Yeah. So that it is a fear of the end of experience, but the more familiar we are with experience, and we see that, when you're in deep sleep, there's no experience. Then waking happens, and you are having fun only when there is experience. The feeling of I enjoy life is here. In deep sleep, there was no worry about the fact that, no sense that why am I not having experience. So in life, you say, I enjoy it. And the more familiar we are with life as experience, I'm not talking about the experience of being on a roller coaster at Disneyland. That's one part of experience. But all of life, just seeing the chair, is experience. All of life, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to deep sleep, including dream state, is experience happening. So life is experience. At some point, like any movie, like any story, there has to be an end chapter. Right? And death is essentially the end of life, the end of experience. And the more familiar we are with experience, the more we realize that it's fine when it's there. Actually, it can be a drag when it's there. If the body is aching, let's say, if you have to do hard work. So you say, okay, experience is sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain. At some point in life, you'll say, I might not have experienced all of the pleasures or all of the pain, but I've experienced enough pleasure to know what pleasure is. I've experienced enough pain to know what pain is. And do I need to experience all of the pleasures? In principle, you know what pleasure and pain is. Furthermore, at a certain time of having lived enough life, especially if the body starts to get tired, you say, actually, I've even had enough of pleasure and pain. The idea of the end of experience is like, what a relief. That's why it's called Mahasamadhi. So samadhi can be peace in daily living, where you are not involved in the pleasure and pain, where there is no attachment to the outcomes, no attitude of doership, and that is a form of samadhi. Death is Mahasamadhi, the ultimate peace. Peace even from the flow of pleasure and pain. And I believe, like even now, the notion of the end of experience, for me, not very old, middle age, I can run with it. Like, okay, one day, Roger doesn't even have to deal with the hassle. Some parts of life are a hassle. You have to walk up hills. You have to walk in the sun. They have their counterbalance as well. You get to, after you've walked in the sun, sit down and have an ice cream, let's say, or walk into an air-conditioned room, and that's play. At some point you say, well, okay, I know pleasure and I know pain, and the notion of no more Roger, no more experience is like, I can live with that. Now, I'm not at the point where I say, you can't live. No, you can't live. Yeah, I'm not at the point where I'm wishing for that. But I know at some point, the last chapter of this story, the story of Rogerness, the last chapter has to be there. And in a way, I know the end of each chapter in going to sleep at night. And it's not at all a problem. And then the next chapter happens, and I'm back here. I go, okay, good, I'm glad to be here for this chapter. And then at night, I know the end of the chapter. Now, in death, my best guess, based on how everything has unfolded, is that there is no more Roger. Death is not much different to falling into deep sleep, as my estimation. Now, if Roger dies and then suddenly I wake up, not I wake up, there is some other entity that wakes up, and it's not going to be Roger. Roger was the dream character. So if some other entity wakes up and then is living life, well, that's not me. That's not Roger. So I don't know what is after death, but I'm running with the model, especially as you become clear on what experience is, that there is no Roger after death. After the death of this physical body of Roger, there is no more Roger experience. And I'm Roger, so whatever is after Roger's death, they can experience it. They can deal with it. And if there is nothing after Roger's death, then there's no one to have a problem with it, no one to deal with it. Your point is very valid. If certain identities are still in place, there is going to be an uncomfortableness with the notion of death. Because death means the end of the psychological identity, and the psychological identity is attached to pleasure, it is attached to experience, it is attached to being. So the notion that I've put forward of nothing is not going to sit well with whatever bits of the identity are still there. But as that gets cleaned out, the experience is no one to have a problem in death.